First, I just wanted to let each one of you go down the line and briefly introduce yourself and your background and what your current role is. Kevin, we can start with you.
Thanks, everyone. Hi, I'm Kevin O'Connell. Today I run an advisory firm in Washington called Space Economy Rising, but I'm also the former director of the Office of Space Commerce at the U.S. Commerce Department. I've really been involved in space commercialization for just about 30 years at this point, and so I chair a number of boards and advisory activities that look at this. I've also been involved in the geospatial world for many years as well. So I think the point that Fred made, which was that policy and technology people need to do a lot better in conversation together, is a key point, and I'm sure we'll get to that during the panel.
Great. Andrew?
Yes, so I'm Andrew Faiola. I'm the commercial director of Astroscale UK, which is a space company in orbit servicing, which we'll talk about in a bit more, but my background is mainly coming from commercial satellite communications world over many years. So it's very interesting to sort of see now this convergence, and Fred mentioned it earlier, about all of the activity that's now happening in low Earth orbit and in fact beyond coming together. So this is that confluence, and yeah, I'm very happy to be part of that.
Great, thank you. Mike?
My name is Mike Gold. I'm Chief Growth Officer at Redwire Space, where we're a global leader in microgravity research and development, built the solar arrays for the International Space Station, the DART mission, and the Gateway. Previously, I was the leader of the International Affairs Group at NASA and legal, was thrilled to lead the Artemis Accords and have the United Arab Emirates as a founding member of the Artemis Accords. Thank you for making that dream of Artemis a reality. And now to have Emirates building the airlock for Gateway is so exciting that we went from in 2009 just building DubaiSat-1, DubaiSat-2 to now literally building the doorway to the moon here in UAE. So exciting to see that. Thank you for the support on technology and policy. And now we'll talk more about commercial space, which is so exciting here in the UAE and around the world.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And like you said, I think we have a lot of topics to cover today. So Kevin, you were formerly the director of the Office of Space Commerce. I think you're well suited to start off this conversation. Can you tell me how the space economy has evolved over the past decade?
Sure, thank you. How many hours have we got, by the way?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm just kidding. So I think I'd highlight two mega trends in this area. The first is that we're at a point in time when we've applied commercial practices to what was traditionally a state-run model for space. And we've seen dramatic changes. Now, to be fair, governments have worked in space for 6 decades, and so we now understand a lot more about risk to allow companies to come into the market. And so when we see things like the market segments that are out there, we're talking about a $500 billion space economy right now. Okay, and we can focus on it at the macroeconomic level, or we can dive into individual verticals like the old ones, remote sensing, communications, or the new ones, space medicine, cryptography in space, things like that. And so it's a rich discussion to have, but the key tendency here is to apply commercial activities to a traditionally state-run space business model. That involves a lot of churn on the policy and regulatory front that we can talk about at some point, and we have to get it right as we go forward. So that's one megatrend. The other is really the explosion of interest in the space economy. Since I left the Commerce Department 3 years ago, I've had the privilege of traveling around the world to essentially talk to entrepreneurs, government officials, financial community people, insurance people, about the space economy, and the interest in the space economy is ferocious. And it's ferocious for multiple reasons. Number one, our tendency to want to explore, to learn about the universe that we're in, but then beyond that, for many, many countries, this is as much about economic development, talent development, and innovation as it is about security or exploration. So there's a real economic impact that we see that many countries, virtually all countries on Earth, are interested at this point. So that's the short answer.
And I'm sure we'll get into a lot of those themes throughout this discussion. So Andrew and Mike, you both work for incredible companies that plan to develop assets for low Earth orbit. This domain holds a lot of opportunities for space development, but with those opportunities also comes a high risk, both to the businesses that choose to operate there and the assets themselves. Just some quick numbers. As of 2024, the Union of Concerned Scientists reported that there's about 6,700 active satellites in low Earth orbit. Last year in 2023, that number was just around 5,000. So it's growing very quickly. And then additionally, space surveillance networks are tracking about 25 to 30,000 objects that are larger than 10 centimeters in LEO as well. So Andrew, I'll start with you. Can you explain Astroscale's business model and how exactly companies can step in and solve this issue?
I'd be happy to. So, I mean, Astroscale itself is an on-orbit servicing company. We're a global company, but acting locally. The challenge, as you've rightly highlighted there, is the massive proliferation of objects in space. And there needs to be effectively a roadside assistance program to help keep those orbital highways safe and secure. So what Astroscale's done is we've developed business lines across our different offices to focus on different challenges in that orbital economy, both in LEO and in GEO. So we focus on life extension, we focus on end-of-life services for constellation operators. You mentioned the increasing launch cadence that we're seeing really start to go exponentially. And we are also focusing on what we call active debris removal, which is the removal of existing objects that are already up there that are dangers to others and can be a hindrance to us actually building a vibrant in-orbit economy. And I'm sure we'll talk about more what the future holds as we get into the discussion here. But at the basics, if we can't sort of clean up our own backyard, we're not going to have a place to build that in-orbit economy. I always try to explain to like my kids or if I'm in a school explaining what we do, really trying to explain that actually low Earth orbit, when you look up, okay, the sky is vast, but in reality, there isn't that much real estate up there. And we have to look at low Earth orbit much like we do the rainforests or the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. It's another part of our environment, and without being able to utilize and use that safely, we could potentially hinder our ability not just to take advantage of low Earth orbit and the economy that we can build there, but also as we become, spacefaring nations, continue to go back to the moon, go beyond, being able to get there, as well as being able to use those assets in space, and it was mentioned earlier, to measure climate change here on Earth. So there's really environmental effects, not just in low Earth orbit, but how we're able to measure and monitor climate change here on Earth as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the later panels in this forum will go exactly into that, how we can use commercial assets to monitor climate change and contribute to sustainability research. Mike, another unique opportunity for this decade is the retirement of the International Space Station. After 20 years of operation, besides from being a destination for our astronauts over the past 20 years, the ISS has been researchers' only platform for microgravity research. I'm wondering if you can explain what makes the microgravity environment unique and why the retirement of the ISS leaves a vacancy there.
Absolutely. The microgravity environment is going to open up a whole new era for commercial and scientific development. At Redwire, we printed the first meniscus in space. So when you try to print with human tissue in space, because of the lack of gravity, and let me warn you, again, I'm a recovering attorney, not a biologist, B minus, but to sum it up, in gravity, things flatten. And when you want to create human tissue, human organs, you can do so in microgravity in a way that would be impossible here on Earth. We proved it with something called the biofabrication facility that was flown in the ISS, public-private partnership, filled it with muscle tissue. And who's had problems with printers here on Earth with ink getting jammed? Try to print microgravity with muscle tissue. Let me tell you, it was extraordinary. But it worked. And we printed a meniscus for the first time. And who wants a meniscus, right? Who wouldn't want that? And we have now flown heart tissue on the ISS as well. And we're going to be working on printing heart patches. This is all leading to the printing of whole organs, livers, kidneys, hearts, potentially transforming this medieval process where right now people have to die in order to get organs. And I've even had friends who've passed away waiting for organ donations. In space, we will be able to change that paradigm and create organs for people who need them. And because the organs will be developed using your own stem cells, you'll avoid all of the painful and expensive anti-rejection therapies that can be fatal in some cases. So this is an example of the confluence of space and biotech that will transform both fields. And it's happening as we speak. And by the way, the astronaut that conducted that experiment, you might be familiar with him. I believe his first name was Sultan. Mm-hmm. So the Emirates actually ran that first experiment on the human meniscus. Beyond regenerative medicine, there's also incredible effects on drug development on the ISS. So drugs are based on crystals, and just like human organs, the crystals you create on the International Space Station can be better and lead to drugs that are more effective, have better longevity. Merck flew a cancer drug called Keytruda, got some very positive results. At Redwire, we just finished flying what we call Pillbox. We love our wonderful names. And that is an automated system. We flew a diabetes drug, heart disease drug, cancer drug, basically what I had for breakfast this morning, and we got excellent results from it. We partnered with Eli Lilly, who are studying these seed crystals, and it's just a thimbleful of seed crystals that you bring back to Earth. But those crystals can lead to a better version of all of the drugs that we're taking today. And again, we're thrilled to be with our partners of Eli Lilly to see what we can get. We'll be flying potentially up to 10 more pill boxes this year. And this is why, while we're all excited right now about commercial space and what the implications are, we're not even at the beginning of the way commercial space is going to transform not just space operations, but life here on Earth. So at Redwire, we're extremely excited to push this field forward. The ISS has been a wonderful catalyst to conduct these experiments and build this experience, but ultimately we'll need commercial space stations to go into production. The International Space Station is many things. I believe those involved in the ISS deserve a Nobel Peace Prize for what they've done. It's an incredible system, but we will need private sector platforms to realize this vision of commercial development in space for biotech.
Yeah, thank you so much. Absolutely fascinating things that can be done in microgravity, and I appreciate you sharing those examples. Kevin, I'll go back to you now. You mentioned this in your earlier remarks, but I'd like to expand on it a little bit. Historically, government contracts and awards have financed the space industry. But we're moving away from that model, and where the government is the customer. And how can we set the space economy up for success and encourage private capital and venture capital to want to invest in all these amazing technologies?
So one of the catalysts of the space economy in the last 5 years has been the arrival of private capital. I was at the Commerce Department with someone who was a Wall Street person, and so we did a lot of focus on private finance and its role. This is still not something that banks are accustomed to financing given the time horizons for space. But what we're seeing is the venture capital community stepped in about 2017 and really fueled the space economy from about that point forward. Now, there have been some ups and downs in the finance world, obviously. But what we see in the private finance community, government financing of space activities is very important, as is private finance. In fact, they're complementary. But what we see about private finance is that because it seeks differentiation between ideas and companies, it actually is an accelerator of the space economy. It's an accelerator of innovation in the space economy. And so we want to make sure that we're actually able to attract finance. I was in Tokyo a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about how to leverage the private finance community to work with a new set of government investments that is going to be made at JAXA and with some other places. So you get, pardon the use of an American term, you get more bang for your buck if you actually use government dollars to actually leverage private finance dollars in the process as well.
Yeah. So Andrew, as this market grows, how do we sustain the demand for in-space servicing, even for assets below low Earth orbit, so in GEO and maybe even beyond?
I think we're lucky in a sense that I actually don't think we need to sustain demand. There's plenty of demand out there. It's how do we meet demand? And I think Kevin sort of hit on a thing or two there around public-private partnerships. We are developing technologies and business models that haven't existed before. This is the old cliche that space is hard. It actually is, and it's also expensive. So really having that that anchor of government or institutional funding to help kickstart some of these industries with private sector money coming in as well has been sort of the way forward. The other area that, as much as it's let's say a four-letter word, regulation. You need the right regulatory environment to actually incentivize some of these activities. I think I'm always, less regulation is better. But in some of these new industries that are starting to come up, actually having that regulatory baseline is important so people understand where they are. It actually helps to attract investment and innovation rather than hinder it. So I think that the demand is there. It's getting the building blocks in place so that we can then take advantage of that and build successful businesses for the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just mentioned the regulatory challenges. And so I open up this question to all three of you. What are they, and what kind of is the best path forward to regulating commercial efforts in space?
Well, maybe I'll start with export controls. That second only to gravity, the ITAR has the best chance of keeping space from getting to where we need to be. And it has been a huge problem, particularly from the United States perspective, that the U.S. at one time dominated, invented commercial space launch, and really I think due to export controls gone wrong, went to having only one space launch per year. And it's not that we have to have trade-offs, frankly, between national security and commerce. They both walk together.
That's right.
And when you have overly broad export control regimes, they actually hurt both, and they hurt the country that implement them. So it's very important that we proceed with common sense export control. That's been a huge issue for the United States that impacts a lot of other countries as well. The second, and I hope everyone drinks a cup of coffee on this one, it's Article 6 of the Outer Space Treaty in terms of the authorization and continuing supervision of commercial space activities. The global regime was not established to account for the robust role that the private sector plays. So we're at this time where technology and the market is outstripping regulation, and we need to find a way to effectively bring commercial space companies to the table to establish the regulations. Now, UN COPUOS has done a really excellent job, I believe, of doing this and has been very aggressive in that outreach. U.S. Department of State. Emirates has in many ways set the pace for that in terms of bringing commercial space to the table. But we've got a lot of work to do to, as you were saying, not only create regulations, but do so that create an environment that is conducive to innovation, conducive to development, while protecting the overall safety of the environment.
Absolutely. Andrew, Kevin, do you have any?
Well, I think just to add to that the regulatory piece, there's some of the things that we are doing have not ever been done before, right? Two commercial spacecraft rendezvousing in orbit together. These things have not happened previously, so it's not even a case of poor regulation or anything like that. It's a case of zero regulation. How do you legislate for these things? How do you put together commercial contracts that address these types of things? How do you ensure these types of missions? So there's many aspects that we're just really at the cusp of figuring out. So it's extremely exciting. We have in some cases a blank slate, but ultimately, we do have to get it right because space is very unforgiving as well. And what we don't want to do is create more hazard by doing things in a cavalier manner, but walking that line between catalyzing private sector, but also making sure it's safe and secure. So it is a balance that has to be struck, which is difficult in and of itself.
So let me leverage both of the prior comments on this. Number one, regulation is often seen as something that's designed to stop people from doing things. That's the wrong way to think about it. It should be designed in such a way that we are incentivizing activities, not trying to just stop them. At times you do have to stop things, but we need to reframe our thinking about how to do this. Second, when you think about the space business, the things that are regulated by most mature space countries are things that they were familiar with for decades before they allowed them to be commercialized. We don't live in that world anymore because entrepreneurs are coming forward with so many different ideas that the governments do not necessarily have any advantage in understanding the technology in depth, et cetera. So to Andrew's point, we have to come up with a framework that actually incentivizes and encourages innovation as opposed to hinders it. Last point, Mike hit on this. The challenge in the space business specifically is the speed of how space technology is operating. In the old days in space, an entrepreneur would come forward and say, hey, I've got an idea, and people would say, that's interesting. It'll be 10 years before it shows up in the market. Well, today it might be 2 years, or it might be 2 weeks before it shows up in the market. And so keeping regulations current is really a critical thing. That's hard to do. Technology always moves faster than policy and regulation. But what it implies for how we work together is a bottoms-up approach, working constantly with industry to understand what's coming in the market, how much money is actually behind it, and what the options are for regulation, and on an iterative basis with industry.
Great, thanks, Kevin. So we've talked about several very fascinating concepts that either are currently a reality or very soon will be a reality. Since this panel was talking about in-space infrastructure, I want to go down the line and have each of you mention any technologies or capabilities that we haven't mentioned so far, and kind of what their capacity could be and how they could transform space. Kevin, we can start with you.
So I'll just mention three categories of things that we see happening specific to the moon, and I'll add perhaps a fourth idea. The market segments, and that's the way I talk about these things, the market segments that are headed to the moon involve three sets of activities. The first is infrastructure. We're going to need just about all of the same infrastructure on the moon that we have here on Earth. Communications, PNT, situational awareness, things like that. So that's one class of things going on. Second, the landers, the rovers, the explorers that are going to look out and do search for water ice and search for all sorts of minerals and things like that. By the way, that needs a tremendous geospatial underpinning, a mapping of the right places to do things on the moon. And then the third category are people who are thinking longer term, and I would include in that there are folks that are actually trying to take advantage of the moon's harsh environment to do things there that we don't do as well on Earth. And so, for example, with large data centers that consume lots of energy and give off lots of heat, I know there was an experiment done where one of these big data centers was dropped into the deep ocean to try to take advantage of the cold. Well, guess what? The ocean started to heat up. That's the wrong answer. And so we might be able to take advantage of the moon's harsh environment to actually do something there that we can't do as well here on Earth. And so those longer-term plans. Make one final point on this. Even as we think about all of this as physical activity on the moon, we see people starting to do digital things. So I'm working with a company that is actually sending 1,500 payloads to the moon that are all digital. And this expresses the interest of so many people, children and schools and again, the medical community, to send digital payloads to the moon. Those are much more sustainable than the physical things we're going to do, but people are thinking about this in different ways as well.
Thank you, Kevin.
Sure.
Andrew?
Yeah, I think to follow on one of the segments that Kevin brought up, our business essentially is critical infrastructure for space. And so today we talk about our first types of services of removing debris from orbit and things like that. But that's because that's what the technology is capable of doing today. You have to walk before you can run. So where does that take us? And ultimately, I think it figures, again, into some of the things that Kevin said, creating an in-orbit service economy, right? So today it might be about, removing cars from the orbital highway, for example. But in future, it's going to be about refueling. It's going to be about refurbishment of spacecraft. It's going to be about recycling of spacecraft. I mean, I think we all know one of the most difficult things of space is actually getting stuff up there. Right? And if you could take advantage of what's already up there and repurpose it, perhaps use it for building materials in a lunar environment, being able to sort of transfer all of that. I mean, today's concept of operations typically is you send something up once and then forget about it. How do we change that whole paradigm so that it's a circular economy in space? And that's ultimately the steps that we're taking to do that, and will be the infrastructure that helps to make that happen. But I see that's, we are really at the sort of first steps today, we as an industry, in making that kind of circular economy in space a reality.
Absolutely.
So I'll sum it up in one word: power. Regardless of what the activity is, science, commercial, etc., if we don't have the energy, we can't get it done. And particularly as we go to the moon, humanity will be power limited. Very proud at Redwire to have built the solar arrays for the International Space Station. This is innovative technology where the arrays are compacted like a carpet and then roll out once they're deployed, so you save room in the rocket ferry and get a lot of volume once you deploy. We also use these arrays for the DART mission, and they were deployed for the first time on a commercial satellite, Ovzon, and we're building the same arrays for the Gateway. The arrays that will be built for the Gateway will be the largest ever deployed by humanity. But we've got to get these systems on the moon to survive the lunar night, to conduct the operations that we want, and to have a permanent presence there. One of the reasons we like the rollouts there is the number one enemy on the moon, dirt, regolith, gets into everything. Yeah. And with the rollout arrays, not only do they roll out, but they retract, and you can actually shake off the regolith because of that. So there's a lot of advantages to those systems. And then second, I would say ISRU, in situ resource utilization. How many people here like going camping, right? So imagine going camping and bringing all of your air, all of your water, all of your food, everything with you. It would be impossible. So if we're going to have a robust and permanent human presence on the moon, we need to learn to live off the land. And this is something we haven't done a lot of yet. And as we move forward with the CLPS missions, our friends at iSpace and elsewhere, we're going to have to convert that water ice to fuel, to breathable oxygen. We're going to have to take that regolith and use it for building blocks and different systems. We have a contract with NASA to build a system called Mason that's going to sinter regolith to create roads, to create structures, landing pads. That's the way we will develop. And of course, that requires power too, so I'll circle back around to that point.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mike, and thank you, Andrew and Kevin as well. And you all touched on the idea of the moon and developing the moon. Our next panel is going to be creating multilateralism in the moon and cislunar space. So I encourage everyone to stick around for that conversation. Thank you again to all three of you, and this will conclude our panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.